Hi folks, James here, and welcome to the Spiro Circle. Today I want to do something that's a little different. The conversation today focuses on HS2, the UK's massive high-speed rail project that promised to connect London, the country's capital, with major cities like Birmingham and Manchester. HS2 was supposed to boost economic growth, it was supposed to cut travel times from city to city, and it was supposed to modernise the UK's transit network. Now, it's doing none of those things. It's become a lightning rod for political debate due to its skyrocketing costs, environmental concerns, shifting government committees, and fierce disagreement on whether the benefits are more than the costs. For some, the story actually goes much deeper than that. One of those people is Michael Gross, a self-made real estate billionaire and founder of Sydney and London Properties. Now, Michael actually owned some of the real estate at Euston Station when it was compulsory purchase ordered, that's CPO, by HS2. This made him one of the largest CPO claimants in British history. Michael says that when we spoke today, he says that he experienced firsthand how some of these major institutions, like the government and the media, they tried to bury mistakes, they tried to silence criticism, and they tried to push ahead with the project at any cost. His story isn't the one that the politicians planned, and it's not the one that the journalists reported on. In fact, it's a story that almost didn't see the light of day at all. In this conversation, we're not just unpacking what HS2 was supposed to be and how much it was supposed to cost, but we're also exploring what Michael lived through, what he tried to expose, and what his experience reveals about how billion-pound national projects can go wrong, and what we can do about that, and how ordinary people can get hurt along the way. Whether you've never heard of HS2 and you don't think this episode is for you, or whether you're just interested in some of the political drama, I promise you that Michael's perspective will make you rethink everything about what's going on in the UK. I hope you enjoy. Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much for taking the time today to speak more about HS2 and to discuss some of the details that many folks may not know or may not have been following. You've called it the next major national corruption scandal, even likening it to Bernie Madoff's situation on steroids. I believe you've called it there somewhere. Why do you believe this project represents a system failure more than just a kind of infrastructure overrun incompetence?
Right. Like most people, the concept of a high-speed railway did not offend me in any way. I saw it working reasonably well on the continent and very well in Japan and in China. My personal involvement began when it was announced because I was the owner of a major part of the site on which Euston Station sits and had hoped to be part of the redevelopment, but knew that I was always likely to be subject of a compulsory purchase order, which is what in fact happened because Network Rail and subsequently HS2 don't believe in letting anybody else in on their party. So the process of compulsory purchase, which has affected about 30,000 people in connection to HS2, is a very one-sided process in which the claimant, the people owning the properties which have been taken, have very little ability to defend themselves against any breach of the acquirer's statutory obligation of paying a fair and reasonable price. Now, I talk as the big one. The biggest single compulsory purchase in British history was the site at Euston. And without going into the unending complexities of the process, I got a growing feeling, to quote Hamlet, that there was something rotten uh, in the HS2 Department of Transport behaviour. Just so that people understand, by the grace of God, some good lawyers, and perhaps my reputation for being or not being a pushover, I settled with Her Majesty's government, not at what they owed me, and certainly not what they wanted to pay me, but probably somewhere halfway between. And it was a sufficient sum of money for me to be able to accept and feel that I had achieved many of the things that I wanted in my life. So I had, at that stage, no longer any particular reason to stay involved with the HS2 affair. However, in discovering that HS2 as a corporation and the government, the then Tory government in the form of the Department of Transport, were acting dishonestly, I had, as I have in other issues in the past, a concern for the other people, the Mr. and Mrs. Smiths up and down the line who had their properties, their homes, their business premises taken away from them by the Department of Transport on behalf
Yeah,
of
I just want to cut you in there, Michael, just so we have just so our readers just so our listeners have a scope of the size of this. It's about 20,000 people were affected. Is that
over
correct?
20,000 people were affected.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Now to put the situation in a nutshell, because again these things are hugely complicated. The government back in 1993 went to Parliament with a figure for phase one of 20 billion. That was from Euston. Our best estimates are if were they to get anywhere near Euston, which they haven't been able to, and after they've destroyed the main rationale for high speed, namely the national network, finishing Euston to Curzon Street would cost somewhere between 300 million and half a billion, and they have no idea how to do it and when they're going to be able to do it. So, but they, in the form of an ex-Deloitte's partner who was first seconded to HS2 and then became a member of it, was acquiring property not on the basis of their statutory obligations. As a gentleman whose name is Michael Eckert said to me and to everybody else, I can't pay you more than is in my budget. And his budget was the 20 million or 3.8 billion, when at the time, 1996, when they went for royal assent, at that time, they knew perfectly well that the figures were in excess of 5 billion. So these people who have no ability to fight Big Brother, who just don't, I'm probably the only person who's risked his entire fortune, his reputation and his health to do it, took whatever they got whenever they were paid it. And most of the professionals they took on board were completely conflicted because they were acting for HS2 as well. So this is why I call it a Ponzi scheme. And this is continuing up to this day. It's not continuing on the national network because that was dropped by Rishi when he realized he could never do it. But they knew in 2013, when they went for the paving bill on the basis of 20 billion, that they couldn't do the railway for anywhere near that. Phase one I'm talking about. The whole railway, I don't know, it's inestimable what the cost would have been. But they knew it wasn't worth doing. They knew it had no cost benefit ratio. It knew that all these claims for connectivity and speed were a load of bloody rubbish. And notwithstanding that, Sir David Higgins incorporated in his report of 2014, which frank those figures, a 95.5% assurance of costs. Well, I got to tell you, there isn't an infrastructure project in the world that anybody would dare put forward that figure. And it probably was about 15 to 20% at best at that time. We've commissioned since a report by Rod Stone, who was former senior fraud investigator of HMRC, which shows very clearly that they knew all this from the beginning and they ploughed on, they lied to Parliament.
If,
Now,
if, if I could interrupt you there, Michael, sorry. At what point exactly did you identify that it wasn't just mismanagement or the standard stereotypical government incompetence, but it was actual corruption? So at what point did you realize the scope of it and the intention?
all right, I can best answer that question by saying it was. I started my CPO experiences around 2000. I'm 10 years. I was 10 years too early. 2017, 16, 17, 18. And then I got a growing realization that they were all crooks. In 2018, there was a panorama program. And on that panorama program, the then chief executive, Mark Thurston, as we now know from the figures that have emerged, was lying out of his back teeth. And there were two gentlemen on that program, Andrew Bruce and Doug Thornton, who at various times been property director of Tesco and Amazon, so they weren't insignificant people, who had been dismissed in 16, 17, sorry, in 16, 15 and 16, dates very difficult to remember, prior to royal assent, for saying you can't put this 20 billion forward, or at least the 3.8 billion in respect of property, because it's fraudulent. And they were sacked as a result of that. And interestingly enough, HS2 and Panorama number 2 called them liars and said they'd been sacked for failing their probationary period. And on Friday, there was a preliminary hearing in a defamation case with these two gentlemen, where the only defence HS2 could put up was that, yes, we did call them liars. Yes, we did say they failed their probationary, neither of which was remotely true, but nobody would believe us. And this absurd defence is designed to prevent these two gentlemen having access to due process and sue them for defamation. And the suit is much more important generally than for those two individuals, as important as it is for those two individuals. It's because under the system of discovery, we know where the skeletons are buried, and this whole Ponzi scheme involving every prime minister, minister, civil servant, and HS2 directors, all of whom were civil servants, and professional firms, and the supply chain. All of this will come out.
Well, that's what I want to touch on, because this has been a long time, and it's cross governments, it's cross prime ministers, which, as you know, there's been at least a handful of prime ministers in the UK for the last couple of years, but it's across all of it, right? It's multi prime ministers, multi governments, because a different party now is in power, of course. What does it say about the state of government as an institution that this is so systemically rotten, as you say?
Well, it does say that it's systemically rotten because it goes to Parliament. The Deputy Speaker today, Nusrat Ghani, you just look at the parliamentary records, Hansard or the TV, and watch her lying to the House in 2019, and we can supply you with the minutes of an internal Department of Transport meeting where it shows that she knew she was lying and did that. And now she's Deputy Speaker. The Speaker wouldn't do anything about it. He said it's a political matter. And I pointed out that lying to Parliament is not political. It's criminal within the parliamentary system. So, unfortunately, and I think, because clearly I have an obsession with HS2, but if you look, and I, funny enough, did write one letter on the subject at the time to the then Minister of Local Government, sorry, I can't pull names out, he's at my age. When the Tory government, when interest rates were not virtually nothing, was lending cheap money to local authorities to spend literally billions on investment properties all over the country outside their area, where obviously they were overpaying. The criminality of that process, which has never been touched on, was massive. And today they're all broke, not least because those properties are worth half or less. And that's one. Then the COVID, where all the ministerial and parliamentary friends were, Lady Bra, etc., were ripping off the country with rubbish protective equipment, etc., etc. I mean, I would say national health procurement. All my doctor's friends say they can buy their computer at Curry's for far less than they have to buy it from the NHS. So who's getting the difference, I wonder?
You've mentioned this. We've spoken now. We've started the conversation talking about HS2 and your direct involvement in that, and some of the things that people may not know happens behind the scenes. But there are other more public scandals that play out that the public may be more aware of. You've highlighted parallels with the post office scandal and the infected blood scandal, and I would go further and say more recently about the grooming gang scandal. I mean, there are myriad of scandals that seem to be coming out of Britain on an institutional level. Why does this keep happening? Why is it that every couple of years there's just another scandal that comes out that either Parliament is trying to hide or the media is trying to disguise? What is that? Why is this happening?
Well, you're obviously quite right. Well, I suppose you sum it up by saying the great and the good are not very great and the very bad. I mean, the morality of all these individuals. There have been endless sex scandals within the Commons and the Lords, prime ministers and ministers and others who resort to the law to protect themselves against anybody being able to mention their own peccadillos and immoralities. It's a very self-protecting society. I mean, the chairpersons, the Labour chairperson of the Public Accounts Committee, now, God help us, the chairman of the most senior Treasury Select Committee, Meg Hillier, and her successor at the Public Accounts, Clifton Brown, actively were accessories to fraud by refusing to allow the truth to be presented to their committees until the figures, in the same way as Madoff, you made the correlation with Madoff. Every Ponzi scheme ultimately explodes because it's like a treadmill. It can't keep going faster. And this is what's happened already partially with HS2 when they finished it as a national network, and will happen notwithstanding the best efforts of the latest villain, Mark Wilde, who all he's doing is covering up the fraud of the past so the fraud can continue. Our system allows bad people to get into very, very powerful positions. They are bad people. They may be funny like Boris. They may be rich like Rishi. Starmer, I don't know what he's got that recommended himself for. I mean, if you look at these people individually, most of them have never held a wealth-producing job. I have to laugh when Labour talk about working people. None of them have ever produced the sort of wealth that the rich people have done to provide for social services. If you look at Angela Rayner, she was rutting like a farmyard animal as a teenager, having children that other people paid to bring up. That's her, but she's very keen to take farmers' land from them, and she's very keen to ensure that that's called communism, by the way. The only people with country dashers, houses, and chauffeur-driven cars are the communist ministers or the Labour ministers.
Well, I want to double tap on this point now, because I do want to take a zoom out and look at the UK more generally than just H2, or more generally than just kind of personal experiences, but I want to look at the nation as a whole. So I've got here some facts. The UK lost almost 11,000 millionaires last year. That's one every 45 minutes. And Britons are now moving abroad, myself included, in record numbers, and unemployment is rising. So the UK appears to be in decline. You've got the wealth creators leaving, you've got young people leaving. How much of this decline?
Professional people leaving,
I'm sorry?
doctors
Exactly.
leaving.
Yeah, you've got young talent and young heritage and culture leaving. So, how much of the UK's decline is structural and how much is just mismanagement? I mean, this can't be a deliberate thing that the Labour government or any other
It is
opponents
a
of.
deliberate. It is a deliberate because they have an ideology, which I call the ideology of jealousy. If I can't make it, nobody else should have it. Look, I left the country 30 years ago before Blair because I could see it happening. Now, better 30 years too early than 30 seconds too late. Um, Human nature is at the basis of human existence. There is a degree of charity in most people. I certainly give fortunes away. What I don't want to do, and what most people don't want to do, is get up early in the morning, work hard, have my money taken away in taxation so Angela Rayner can have teenage unmarried children, right? Because I don't think that's fair. And a two-cat rule. So we now have some young woman who's had 6 children by 5 different men, 3 of whose names she can't remember. And who's paying for it? Who wants to pay for it? Who should pay for it? We've gone mad.
Well, so I want to touch on what you've said because you mentioned it, the two-child cap. Um, with plans to remove the two-child cap and this increased welfare state that Britain seems to be building for itself, what message are those actions sending to entrepreneurs or investors? A lot of people that listen to my show are of that space, the tech investment space. So
Don't worry about the entrepreneurs and the investors because they've probably made enough money to be able to protect themselves to some degree now, less than they could when I did it. Worry about the average Joe. Worry, I'll tell you what it produces. I have a friend who's a butcher, successful butcher. He needs people to cut up meat. He's prepared to pay 40,000 a year for a manual job. And he tells me on a regular basis he can't get anybody because they say, unless you pay me some cash, it's not worth me going to work. I can get it out of the system. And that sums it up. They've created a self-destructing system. So all this mendacity, lying about growth and we'll make growth, we've just gone into recession within 18 months of these people. Because none of them actually have ever worked for in a wealth producing context. Really.
yeah, news came out just a few days ago. The economy
They,
shrank yet again by I think
yeah,
0.1%. It's a shrinking economy, and nothing's being built in the
and it
UK.
will get worse. Under this government, we will go into depression. Not we are in recession. We will go into depression, mass unemployment, breakdown of social services. Look, Birmingham hasn't got dustmen. The, 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 the social security is meant to protect the most vulnerable, the most deserving. When I had my first office in Lisson Grove, I was opposite a big job centre. And I used to see the hookers come out at Pimp's BMW and claim benefit. And I know it's an absurdity, it's an extreme, but that is what is going on. Suddenly we're all crazy, we need mental health. I recognize my mental failings and my stresses and my strains. I do my best to cope with them. We've formed ourselves. Nobody's responsible for themselves anymore.
Yeah,
And
well,
those people,
I am definitely victim to some negative thoughts myself. I think a lot of people are, but you're right. It's all about how to get on with it, and that there's that British stiff upper lip attitude that I think is going away in young people, which I think is a missing aspect, and one that's definitely, when you live in Israel and you've had 2 years of, well, at least 2 years of war, there's that resilience among young people here.
4.6% growth last year. And
Mm.
we were under rocket. I sat on my balcony on my 78th birthday with Iranian ballistic missiles falling and 9 grandchildren in the shelters. And we had 4.6% growth.
Yeah, it's.
Because
I mean, it's a miracle.
at the end of the day, we are responsible for our fellow man up to a point.
Do
But
you
we're
think?
not
Do you
responsible.
think Keir Starmer still has a job in 1 year?
Keir Starmer was an unsuccessful criminal barrister who became a civil servant and has a miserable record in that capacity. He has much ability, but I do want to take it back to HS2. Ask yourself why Reeves, Alexander, Keir Starmer, the Labour cabinet didn't cut HS2. Why did they commit 25 billion, a black hole by itself, to this useless branch line from outside London to outside Birmingham? Why? What was the motive? I can think of lots of criminal motives. I can't think of a positive motive. Whether speed, when you get off at Old Oak Common, it takes you about 20 minutes to get to the next train, and that hasn't got the capacity to take you. Capacity? Why don't they put, like they did in Sheffield, put bigger trains on the tracks? Euston is falling apart, been falling apart for the best part of 40 years. And they ain't got near it. The bid, I was one of the bidders. I do have skin in the game now. I discovered that Tom Venner, Civil Service, and Lend-Lease cooked the bid, and they haven't been able to lay a brick. There's no plan to do Euston.
But
This,
Britain
we
must
are,
be
there's
building in other
endemic
things, right? I
corruption.
mean, the whole point
What?
is that things need to grow. So is Britain building anything? What's going on? I mean, its economy is shrinking, and it's not building infrastructure. What's it building?
Well, it may be building infrastructure, but it's building it at a cost that makes it unaffordable. Lower Thames crossing, right? The biggest underwater tunnel in the world is in Scandinavia. They spent less on the entire tunnel than these people have spent so far, and they haven't laid a brick or dug a hole. Third runway in to one slab of concrete has taken 30 years, and we haven't got it yet. It'll be another 10 years before we get it. I mean,
Yeah, that's literally just pavement, concrete.
well, it's not literally, but you exaggerate to make a point. But it's been 30 years that we needed capacity. They could have put a second runway in Gatwick. They could have put another runway in. If you give the civil service a job, if you give Bernadette Kelly and Philip Rutman and all the other incompetent crooks that they employ in these ministries, that are much vaunted civil service, the job of doing anything practical, you might as well forget it.
Is there a way that trust in these institutions can be restored, whether it's parliament or ministries or, I mean, you name it? Is there any way that we can restore trust back?
Well, I'm a student of history, and the first two monarchs called Charles prorogued Parliament. So I think it'd be somewhat ironic if our current sovereign, much loved, uh, decides to prorogue Parliament and replace all these useless, unqualified, incompetent, and dishonest politicians with technocrats. And
Can I?
maybe that's it. Maybe that's what we need to do.
Can I ask what the media's role in all of this was? Because a lot of people listening today
The
might
media is,
think, oh, well, if Michael was speaking the truth, we'd read about it in the news or they'd be reporting fairly. Now, I've been living in Israel for 8 years. I know that the news doesn't always reflect the truth, let alone institutions like the BBC when it comes to certain topics. So, what is what's the state of the news media right now that reports on these kinds of things?
I can speak from bitter personal experience. Let me take the Financial Times, who threatened to sue me, but like everybody that I've mentioned and many more besides, nobody's sued me yet. One day I suppose it will come, and at least I'll have discovery. But the Financial Times, Jill Plimmer had this stuff 10 years ago. And she told other people that her editor had been lent on by the government and she was not allowed to print the truth about HS2, anything really negative. And I think that's Elizabeth Plowden at Panorama. They did put out 2 programs which did have an effect, but they weren't allowed to tell the truth. They weren't allowed until the second Panorama even to mention the word fraud. And then they had to put, like I just told you, HS2s that denigrated the whistleblowers and Hammond, who said, "Oh well, I knew it was rubbish from the beginning, but then I got convinced." All this sort of rubbish. They tempered and to some extent neutralized the truth by allowing all these people denial. Now, if, as in this case that was heard on Friday, a government agency, HS2 is owned and controlled and totally at one with the Department of Transport. If they go allowed to go on national television and denigrate somebody, the chances are you will believe them. And that's what's been going on. All these denials, Meg Hillier, Clifton Brown, after the event, they try and cover up by being critical. But at the time where it made a difference, if you'd stopped HS2 in its tracks before Royal Ascent or after Royal Ascent, we'd be talking about tens of millions. Now we're talking tens of billions. Now we're talking about hundreds of billions.
And how do we undo that? Is it like the sunk cost fallacy? Is it just are our feet in too deep?
We need to have a royal commission about our constitution. Someone once said democracy isn't the best form of government, but it's the least bad. Well, I'm not sure what it produces. If it produces, I'm in a sense apolitical, right? Because I was conservative most of my life, but when I see how these people behave, when you go to Priti Patel, which I did, and she won't do anything, they will not. To give you an example of the depth of corruption, the person who was known as the biggest champion against HS2, because it went through her Buckingham constituency, was the late Cheryl Gillam. Now, we, many years ago, went to see Cheryl Gillam. That's when I say we, me, my lawyer, my lobbyist, and there were her people there as well. And at that time, we knew a fraction of what we knew now, but we knew enough. And she said, "You've made some very serious allegations. I have to see something in writing." I said, "You'll have it tomorrow morning." She had it, and of course, nothing happened. But that's not the bad part. She actually said something which haunts me to this day. Remember, this is the woman who's championing the campaign against HS2 in Parliament. "I don't care what you send me," she said, "if it embarrasses, let alone harms, my friends Theresa, i.e. May, the Prime Minister, and Chris, i.e. one of the worst players in this, Grayling, the Secretary of Transport, I will do nothing." And that sums it up. Political advantage, financial advantage, they are preeminent. The public good, it's unseen.
You said that you considered yourself a conservative and you don't feel that way anymore. And there are plenty of people.
I'm a capitalist. Put it this way: I believe in capitalism.
There are a lot of people that feel the same way, if not towards Conservatives than towards Labour or Lib Dems, just basically fed up with the parties, and think there's any validity in these polls, or do you think it's
Well, I
hearsay? I
don't
mean,
think it's a
talk me through
question
about
of,
what you see coming out of this.
well, it's frightening. I met Mr. Farage. I've got nothing for or against Mr. Farage. I'm quite impressed with Mr. Tice and Mr. Yosef, but they are not, at this moment of time, may become with their, they are not really a credible political party in the sense they are a party of what's the expression now, of dissatisfaction. Now I wish them well because I wish the country well. Someone's got to govern it, but I have no idea what. I think we'll have a hung parliament, which generally speaking is the worst of all worlds, because nothing gets done, and the only thing gets done are the things that shouldn't get done. I don't know. I think there isn't enough. First of all, you know, as a person of Jewish faith, I think England's finished for us. What happened in Australia, I think the diaspora's probably finished for us. I think we should take our culture, our faith, our medicine, our scientific, our entrepreneurship, and all come to where we both are speaking from, Israel. Because
Just for context for those watching or listening now, Michael and I are speaking on the first day of Hanukkah, and we just came off hearing the news about the attack on Bondi Beach in Sydney. So we're speaking mere hours after that took place. So that's the context of how we're speaking today.
well, I felt like that before Bondi, but you know, Manchester and what's happening is that the country is pandering to its anti-Semitic instincts while at the same time allowing a Muslim invasion. So at the end of the day, they'll pay the price for it. And not every Muslim is a terrorist, but every terrorist seems to be a Muslim. I think that's another huge problem. This influx of illegal immigrants who end up inevitably being a drain on the national resources, at least the first generation. So I think there's so many huge problems, none of which are being addressed. We have a government of propaganda, of no substance whatsoever. I mean, if you really wanted to make things better, you'd have cut incoming Labour government would have cut HS2, but they were so involved in the scandal as an opposition that they couldn't do that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just saw as well. There's a Times poll. Well, I don't know if it's from the Times, but the Times highlighted it, saying that the majority of the British public would actually scrap HS2 entirely if it meant filling that black hole in the budget.
It shouldn't have got to where it is. But you know, what's the common thing? If you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. Boris went on television, reused and said, "No, we're carrying on." And look where we are, nowhere.
Listen, Michael, you and I could talk all day about this. I know that you and I are both very opinionated and passionate about these topics. We are running out of time, unfortunately, but I do want to give you an opportunity in these final moments just to offer some advice thinking about leaving, whether it's Europe, America, Israel, wherever, just emigrating somewhere. What would you tell them and why?
Well, talking to my fellow British, I'm still British citizens, I think I grew up in what I thought was the greatest country in the world. I was educated there. I have a very strong intellectual patriotism. I'm a royalty. I have the privilege of a relationship with the late Prince Philip that I valued very highly. I think you need to take responsibility for your own destiny. So when you get MPs that you know are rotten, like my own former constituency where I lived, Hampstead, and you've got Tulip, a convicted fraudster in her country of origin, Bangladesh, I think you need to remove them. And there is a process to remove them.
She was actually my MP.
Yeah, so mine too. So my advice to my fellow citizens in Britain is take your destiny in your own hands. Don't be passive. You can do something. You can recall your MPs. And I think everybody should look carefully at the voting record, especially on things like HS2, of their MPs and get together and recall. It's not a party thing, it's an individual thing. As to the Jewish community, with great sadness, I think that the days in the diaspora are over, but Britain everywhere else, for two reasons. First of all, our own failings, that we are assimilating. We are not keeping to the precepts of our religion. I think the late Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin said to everybody who knew him, including me, no religion, meaning halakhic Judaism, means no Jews, means no Israel. So from a Jewish point of view, I think that's a key thing. This is with all its faults, and certainly we've got a government that is not dissimilar to the British or French or American governments. We've got rubbish in our proportional representation system also produces rubbish. It's still a great country. It's still a great country. I think, there's science here. There's medicine here. There's charity here. There's social security here, and they're brave people here. And I think this is our destiny. God said to us, "This is the land I give to your forefathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." It's not the land of Israel yet. It's the state of Israel. We have to improve our own personal performances to think of a messianic era, but we've got it. It's there. Take advantage of it.
That is 100% the topic for our next episode that we'll record again in the future, but we are out of time today. Michael, it has been so illuminating to hear direct and personal testimony to the scandals unfolding in Britain, and thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.